Good evening from our headquarters in Kiev. This is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only prime-time TV program explaining the Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I'm Natalia Humanyuk. More to follow. For 3 years, Berlin is leading Ukrainian-Russian negotiations. What is the key issue in this debate? Our exclusive interview with the German ambassador to Ukraine. Montenegro is joining NATO. What does the banning of Russian officials to Montenegro mean? How bots are shaping elections all over the world. We talked to a cybersecurity expert from the Oxford Internet Institute. 600 international volunteers from 140 countries arrive in Ukraine to teach socially important subjects in school across the country. Go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua, where you can see the full version of our interviews and reports. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook, search Hromadske International, and we'll be back in a second. It's been 3 years since the start of the Ukrainian-Russian talks in the Normandy format. It began with the first meeting of the Ukrainian and Russian presidents Poroshenko and Putin after the start of the Russian aggression in 2014. They were joined by German and French leaders. Later came Minsk I and Minsk II, terms which have become synonymous with stalemate, as the discussion has reached a new level of controversy here in Ukraine. There is still a constant flow of news of those wounded and killed on the Eastern Ukrainian front line. There is a vocal group in Ukraine society claiming that the West is pushing Ukraine to concessions. At this stage, it's very hard to understand what's going on. More or less, the discussion stopped making progress a year ago, when it was not clear who'd win the elections in the US. And then the French election cycle started, yet now it's time to see what's next. We've spoken to the German ambassador to Ukraine and tried to make sense of what to expect. Mr. Ambassador, thanks a lot for the interview, we would like to really clarify where we are going with the Russian, Ukrainian, German, French talks with Normandy Forum. What would happen next? Because I think there is a level of fatigue from the general public, and there is less understanding than now. But what we know that the German Chancellor Merkel, since the last months, has the chance to talk to most of the participants, to President Poroshenko, to the President Putin. She has met the French president. So really, what's new, and we're also curious, how does Berlin sees the difference in the position of Moscow and Kiev? Where the things are not matching?
Well, what you're asking is the million-dollar question. Yeah, we all have. I think we have a goal in common, but the way to reach this goal is not clear, because it is quite apparent by now, as you say, after 3 years, that there are very divergent opinions on what the actual how to achieve the goal and what the content and kind of the detail of the agreements that exist are. So this is in a permanent process, and part of the value of the process is that we at all have a basis, a written basis for the discussions, and that there is discussion. Imagine a situation where we did not have a basis of agreed principles and where we did not have formats to discuss. It's not worthless to reiterate what the basis is, because we, of course, know that this basis is under controversial discussion, in particular here. But as for what is required next, our position and the French position is very clear, and it coincides with the Ukrainian position for that matter. It is that, first of all, we need to improve the security situation. We need to have a sustained ceasefire, the moving away of heavy weapons, and thereby a solid basis of no more fighting, on which then one can base further steps in the implementation of the Minsk agreements.
But still, what, for instance, are the demands of the Russian side? If we speak beside the security, which is very clear.
But broadly speaking, we have two packages of the Minsk agreement, the security-related issues and the political issues. And the main debate is about which elements of which package come at what time.
As, for instance, I'll add to that, of course, besides the security, there are these issues about, who controls the border, when there are the elections. But these are discussions which are lasting for the last 2 years, all about that. So really, what are discussed now? For instance, if Ms. Merkel meets, both presidents, what issues are raised?
All right. I mean, for instance, if we speak about security, there is the kind of abstract level of maintaining ceasefire. Then we have the disengagement of, or the moving away of heavy weapons. Then we have the issue of disengagement zones. There's the idea, and it would be really good if there could be disengagement zones, in particular where people cross the line of contact, and where to have them and how to implement them. One big issue regarding these disengagement zones is the clearing of mines, for instance. Then we have another set of issues that have to do with SMM, the access of SMM to all parts which lie within its mandate, the entire territory of Ukraine, their security.
So what you more or less, what we know from the recent Normandy meeting, of course not with the leaders themselves, that there was a talks about kind of a roadmap. So really, is there existing the agreed roadmap by 4 sides, which could be applicable?
No, we don't have an agreed roadmap. There's a draft, but there's a lot of disagreement on the content of the roadmap.
If we go broader, because it's a larger issue, at any level, in the process, we're not speaking exactly about Minsk. Are we talking about the kind of the temporary administration which should be in the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic, and the possibility that they would be run by the personalities which would be agreed by the Ukrainians and the Russians? As a temporary administration is part of the solution of any conflict, often.
Temporary administration is not a main feature of the Minsk agreements. The Minsk agreements contain provisions about the withdrawal of foreign troops, control over the border, local elections which are supposed to take place, but transitional administration is not really a main feature of this. I think it makes good sense to concentrate on the matters that are in principle agreed and how to implement them. And if you introduce new elements into the discussion, the effect is likely to be that there's additional disagreement over these things. Yeah?
And how do you see then these kind of ideas about the parallel tracks? We knew, and there is no secret, that, for instance, there was a parallel track with the US Undersecretary Victoria Nuland and Vladislav Surkov. They were meeting, and also we know that there is no person now which is appointed for this role in the US, but there would be that person. So how do you see this kind of the parallel tracks, and how the Germany sees, and what we can hope with?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, parallel tracks in negotiations are a bad idea, because they get exploited by the one or other side and to play the interlocutors against each other. So if we have, on the other hand, parallel discussions, everybody discusses with everybody in international diplomacy. And so what is key is that there is close agreement and close coordination between, in this particular case, the United States and Germany and France in the Normandy format. And we are very closely discussing and cooperating, have been during the previous US administration, and we are also speaking intensively with the new US administration.
Do we see that the US would be involved to the Normandy Forum?
I think at this point there are no indications that the United States want to become a full participant in the Normandy format. Imagine that would mean that if there's a top-level meeting, we would need the presence of President Trump. Yeah? President Trump has a lot of other things he needs to take care of and wants to take care of. So it's not quite clear whether by including President Trump, maybe we create an obstacle for more frequent meetings at the top level. You know? So this is one of the issues which need to be carefully considered and which maybe, I don't know, maybe lead to it that the Americans still at this point in time, also under the new administration, say they are comfortable with the way things are set up today.
But there is not really the secret that the Russian President Putin really, and there are this, you know, it's not just the talks, that the US for Russia is more or less the key guarantee for reaching the agreement, and that would be the thing that they always, the Russians wanted to talk to the US.
I guess you're right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they would want the United States in the Normandy format. Yeah.
So coming back to the, you know, very concrete things which are in Minsk, can we speak about any kind of time framework? You know, where we can expect any kind of the elections in Donbass, as when we started, and I remember very well, we had this discussion that it should take place by the end of 2015.
Unfortunately not, no, because, I mean, you are right in pointing out that the timelines have expired, and I think experience shows we were right not to set new time limits, because as is in particular the Ukrainian side keeps pointing out rightly, today we don't have any kind of prerequisites in place for elections.
President Poroshenko had mentioned, and it wasn't just him, the idea of the peacekeeping mission.
And or any kind of initiative to make even this civilian monitoring mission more robust meets obstacles. So a peacekeeping mission of, for instance, the United Nations is a different quality. But there's one prerequisite which they have in common, the civilian, and so that is also a peacekeeping mission of the United Nations requires a real ceasefire which works, and the agreement of all those who can kind of put this peacekeeping mission in danger.
If you speak that the peacekeeping mission is way too complex, maybe you can come back to any other creative ideas on the transitional administration or anything that, because I mean, like, just to see it clearly that there would be some guarantees of security.
I think as far as Germany and France are concerned, we would be happy to consider any original and at the same time realistic idea. Only you and I think we agree that 3 years we have been running into obstacles. And so I think we have the kind of amount of fresh ideas that may still be around and be at the same time realistic is fairly limited.
Is the Ukrainian government coming up anytime with some fresh and new ideas?
Well, yes, there are fresh ideas, but them being fresh is not sufficient. They also have to be realistic, or they need to be, one needs to see a chance to put them into action.
There is some kind of the sentiment in the society that in the end, of course, the West is supporting Ukraine, but it's tired. It is tired, and it would be tired of this conflict. And of course, there is the idea that this war should be over, and there should be again back the trade with Russia, and there would be in more or less that Ukraine would be enforced to make the concession. So how would you explain it to, you know, to the Ukrainian population who have this opportunity now to say why, and why the population should accept that if they just really feel unfair about the whole, you know, the fact that the Ukrainians should make concessions?
Well, I mean, that the situation is unfair is out of question. Of course, Ukraine is the side that is suffering from this protracted conflict. This is why we are making a diplomatic and very intensive diplomatic effort to kind of find a solution. This is why Chancellor Merkel and former French president, as well as the new French president, are eager actually to kind of engage personally in the search for a solution. And on top of that, second point, we have imposed sanctions on Russia, which kind of sees to it that Russia pays a price for the ongoing conflict. So I think if one looks at it fairly, one can say there's really a lot of kind of effort going on from the West. But that, of course, does not offer a guarantee that there will be a quick solution the way Ukraine wants it. And the second point, other point is, yes, I mean, the Minsk agreements are not 100% Ukrainian position. They lead to an end result, which is the restoration of international law. But there are political provisions which are not to the liking of everyone here in this country, I know. Yeah? These provisions are the price which Ukraine pays for the restoration of international law. Yeah? Because it is not realistic to expect that we wake up one morning and Russia has decided, or the separatists have decided, that they will leave and that everything will be as before. You know,
how do you see the impact of this discussion, which is today is more loud than before in the Ukrainian parliament? You see pretty well-known Ukrainian politicians and the public figures who would prefer to dismiss Minsk. How that, and how do you see, how confident you are? And we see that the elections would come. All the parties have to make concessions to this idea. Nobody would like to look weak in front of the public.
Yeah, I can only kind of encourage everybody in Ukrainian politics to think in practical and realistic terms. Yeah? Imagine a situation without Minsk. Let's remember, 90% of the civilian casualties in this conflict date from before the Minsk package. Yeah? So you can be annoyed and frustrated about the lack of further implementation of the steps in the Minsk program. But one effect, I would argue, of the Minsk being in existence and there being an international discussion in existence is that it has kind of at least reduced the level of suffering to a certain degree. Yeah? I'm not saying there's no suffering or it's not really bad, but I think it's less terrible as it used to be in 2014. Yeah? So everybody who wants to kind of scrap Minsk or wants to pass a law in parliament which draws lines in the red lines, yeah, and makes agreement in Minsk on the basis of Minsk impossible or very difficult, have to think what effect that will have. I would argue Minsk is not perfect, but I think it is pretty good if one gets it to be implemented.
There is this new dynamic with the new French president, Macron. He is pretty clear in his relations with Vladimir Putin. We are following the news. There is a new dynamic. He's more proactive than the previous president, Hollande. So really, how do you see how that could influence on the Russian-Ukrainian talks?
Well, I think one also has to be fair to President Hollande. He was also very active, and he's done quite a lot. We are very happy, I think, that we have President Macron, in particular in light of what the alternative would have been. But we will have to see whether this kind of the new person at the table leads to a new dynamic. That we don't know.
On June 5, Montenegro will formally join NATO and become the 29th member of the alliance. By absolute chance, it was the Montenegrin Prime Minister Duško Marković who was in the spotlight of the global press when the US President Trump pushed him making his way to the podium during the NATO summit in Brussels last week. Yet NATO enlargement is, of course, a disputed issue between the West and Russia today, especially regarding this Balkan country, which is considered to be strongly influenced by Moscow. A few days before Montenegro joining the North Atlantic Alliance, they reportedly barred 149 Russians and Ukrainians from entering the country in response to recent bans Moscow placed on Montenegrins. What has been confirmed? What has not? What obstacles did Montenegro face on the way to accession, and was Russia involved? Why was society divided on this issue? My colleague Zhanna Bespenchuk talked to Momchilo Radulovic, president of European Movement Montenegro.
It is a fact that the Russian list of people from Montenegrin officials who are proclaimed to be persona non grata in Russia already exist. But it is not public, and Russia officials have rejected to publicize the list. But they said, and they have instructed through a spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, that all citizens of Montenegro should ask in the embassy of Russia in Montenegro if they are allowed to travel to Russia, which is quite unusual. On the other side, Montenegro, in this moment, as far as I know, does not have its own list with these names, but it does have. Montenegro have already joined EU sanctions in general against Russia, including some of the Russian officials. So basically, Montenegro is following European Union policies in these matters, and it might happen that Montenegro will add few names to this list, and it is still in the area of speculation who might be on this list, and but it is in this moment it might be said that some of the names that were deeply involved in the attempt of the coup in Montenegro will be on that list.
And are there any possible assumptions who could be these people that were involved in the alleged coup d'etat in Montenegro last year?
As I heard also from media reports and speculations that people like Russian tycoon Timofeyev, the owner of this, I think, Tsarigrad TV station, and some other people around him will be on that list, or might be on that list, because it was obvious, because in the middle of these happenings prior and after the elections in Montenegro, this TV station and Mr. Malofeyev had a significant propaganda impact in Russia, but also in some media here in Montenegro.
Why does the Russian side need this story? Because in a few days, Montenegro will become the member for NATO. So what's the point to initiate this story with entry bans? How do you think?
But not only that. This is only a surface. This is only top of the iceberg. Russia is doing many more things against Montenegro, and including this attempt of the coup, which was obviously organized with the consent, silent, direct or indirect consent of the Russian authorities, because some of the people from Russian intelligence forces were involved in that. So that economical sanctions, sanctions against people, media pressure, cyber attacks, those are some of the things that are on the list of the pressures that Russia is imposing on Montenegro in the last year or two. This is a very unfortunate situation, because nobody that expected in Montenegro At least we didn't expect this to happen in such a strong and energetic manner since our long-lasting friendship with Russia, because it is obvious now that Russian friendship lasts only until the point where Montenegro or any other country from the Western Balkans shows its own will and its own interest to protect its own interests. Because our interest is to join European Union and to join Euro-Atlantic integration and to join NATO. So it was never hidden from in the time when Montenegro was gaining independence in 2006. Even from 2006 till today, Montenegrin leadership was never hiding this intention. But in that time, relations between NATO and Russia were in different mode. But as the situation between NATO and Russia were worsening, also the Russian attitude towards Montenegrin membership to NATO was also getting in that very negative gear, let's say. So in this sense, we didn't expect this to be on such a strong scale. But I think it's strategically very wrong from the Russian side, because they are breaking up, let's say, centuries old friendship with Montenegrin people, because really this is not accepted that in the 21st century, in the time of modern communication, one country, however it's big and strong as Russia, is trying not to allow other independent country and friendly country as Montenegro to choose its own way in terms of international relations, in terms of development in economical and political sense.
In 2013, Russia has tried to ask the Montenegrin government for the permission to use its military facilities in northern Mediterranean. At least there is such information in media, and it was rejected because obviously the Montenegrin government has decided firmly to enter the North Atlantic Alliance instead. So could it be the real reason why Russia is still so much worried that Montenegro joins the North Atlantic Alliance, because it loses any hope to control the North Mediterranean?
It is a fact. Russia can accept or not accept that. NATO is controlling in this moment all countries of the North Mediterranean, from Portugal till Turkey. So basically, Montenegro was the last puzzle in this, last piece in this puzzle, let's say, and we have choose our way, because for us it was much more natural to join all our neighbors, because all our neighbors are, all our Mediterranean neighbors are already in NATO. We didn't feel any pressure from them. It was our choice. It was our interest to join NATO, and I don't think that, as I said, is the right way to answer on our interest, because we were not endangering interests of Russia. Nobody, at least when we were defining our own interest, we didn't calculate our own interest to damage Russia, but only to benefit to us, to Montenegrin citizens and society. So I don't see why reaction of Russia is such a strong and such harsh and with such a hostility. But of course, I can understand global interests of Russia, but I do believe there is always modalities to fulfill these interests, global interests of Russia, in a much more moderate way, through modern diplomacy, through economical interests, and through political cooperation, not through open confrontation and certain kind of new war that they are waging against us.
That was one opinion from the representative of a movement which unites pro-European organization. We also talked to the British reporter and author of several books on the Balkans, a true expert on the region, Tim Judah.
Do you see any real attempts of Russia to utilize the current divide in Montenegro in own interests?
I think it's probably a bit late for that, since Montenegro will join NATO on June the 5th. What we had in October was a very strange affair in which the Montenegrin authorities claimed that Russia or Russians, it's not really clear, or people connected to the Russian intelligence service, those two people are indicted, they claimed that they were behind some sort of coup attempt which aimed at derailing Montenegro's path towards NATO. And that court case has just begun. But it's a very strange court case, and like everything else, divides Montenegrins between those who believe that there was a coup attempt and those who believe that the whole thing was a kind of theatrical production done by the government in order to get people to go out and vote on election day, because the arrests happened before election day, but it was all announced on election day.
How do you think the memory and the pain of the Kosovo war, is it still present in Montenegro, affecting the attitudes of people to NATO, to the West, etc.? What do you observe?
Montenegro is a small society. 74% of its 620,000 people are Orthodox Christian heritage and either identify themselves as Serbs or Montenegrins. Certainly the vast majority of Serbs are still very bitter about the Kosovo war, the bombing of Serbia, and to a lesser extent Montenegro, and will never be reconciled to joining NATO. Montenegrins are more divided because some look at what happened to you in Ukraine. Some people might be against NATO, but many ethnic Montenegrins are in favor of joining NATO. They look at what happened to you in Ukraine, and they think, like you thought, that Russia was your great brother and your great friend. They think, well, we have excellent relations in Serbia, but we don't know what will happen in the future. Maybe in the future, a future Serbian leader will try and whip up ethnic tensions amongst ethnic Serbs and try to take over the country again in the future. So Montenegrins, some are against NATO, but others are certainly for it because of that reason, and as I say, looking to the example of what happened in Ukraine. And then you have ethnic minorities, primarily Bosniaks or Bosnian Muslims, and ethnic Albanians, and they're completely in favor of NATO membership.
In 1 week, Ukrainians will be able to travel to EU countries without visas. The message is really clear: reforms pay off. I quote Johannes Hahn, Commissioner for European Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations, who visited Ukraine this week. Can the issue of e-declaration for anti-corruption activists be solved before the summer break? What are the EU concerns regarding the elections of Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau auditors? Is the European Union pushing the idea of setting up an anti-corruption court here in Ukraine? Watch what he says.
The European Union is happy to provide assistance, but we also expect Ukraine to deliver results. The recent amendments of the e-declaration law, extending the e-declarations to NGOs and non-resident supervisory board members. This is an issue which has created a lot of also international attention, and we are in an ongoing discussion with the Ukrainian president, but it's also an issue of the Parliament. Such kind of legislation should not hamper the work of NGOs, and this is something where we have to see what could be a common ground, and I'm confident that this issue can be sorted out, hopefully even before summer break. NABU has been one of the success stories in Ukraine's fight against corruption, but we are worried that their independence and effective functioning are too often put into question. Currently, we are concerned that the appointment of the 3 NABU auditors is becoming politicized. The remaining 2 auditors, therefore, should be appointed swiftly. in line with the respective law and in a transparent way. The National Agency for Prevention of Corruption, this institution needs urgently to start delivering on its mandate. By this I mean in particular the effective and objective verification of e-declarations and the identification of potential conflicts of interests amongst public officials. Finally, we need to see the establishment of special anti-corruption courts. So far, progress with anti-corruption cases in court has been slow, and it's urgent that the specialized courts get off the ground. The visa liberalization will now really come into force on the 11th of June. It's really a well-deserved reward for important reforms undertaken by Ukraine, and the best example how citizens can really benefit from reforms. The message is very clear: reforms pay off. The final vote in the Dutch Senate, which paved the way for the completion of the ratification process of the EU-Ukrainian Association Agreement, which anchors our relationship in a clear and stable legal framework. What now counts is that the opportunities of the association agreement and this DCFTA are really utilized, and this means we need the necessary legal decisions here in Ukraine, in the Rada, to meet all these, for instance, technical standards, etc., which finally allows Ukrainian companies to export to the European market, to have access to the European market. And in particular, when it comes to technical standards, European technical standards are very often global technical standards. So if you meet the requirements, the European requirements, you have automatically access to a wider market. I would like to reassure that the European Union will further continue supporting Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty, not to have any doubts about it. And the recent G7 meeting confirmed that there is no lifting of sanctions before the Minsk agreements are fulfilled in their full scope.
Facebook, Google, and Twitter have recently been facing scrutiny for promoting fake news stories. Here in Ukraine, fake news isn't really a new phenomenon. Bots which are sharing false information played and are still playing a role in shaping people's opinion, especially regarding major political choices. Yet the issue has become global. Earlier, Hromadske correspondent Angelina Karyakina spoke to Monika Kaminska, a cybersecurity expert from the Oxford Internet Institute. They discussed fake news versus junk news, the role of social media in recent elections, how bots manipulate information sharing online, and adapting to the pace of technological change.
So you are using this term, computational propaganda. What is it about? Is that already a science term?
So the term computational propaganda, the way we use it is basically when it's the kind of where algorithms and software meet social media. So what computational propaganda does is it distributes misinformation across social media. That's how we understand it.
How do you distinguish between propaganda, fake news, junk news? What's the difference there?
Yes, so we don't use the term fake news really. We use junk news. I suppose fake news has really become a bit of a catch-all term for lots of different things. It's even been used by politicians to discredit legitimate journalism, but critical journalism. So junk news, I think, really encapsulates that sort of hyper-partisan, very propagandist, overly emotional content that we're really researching. So we go with junk news. Also because a lot of junk news we've found isn't necessarily completely untrue. It's just very, very biased in some way.
Why exactly propaganda?
So we're interested in how public opinion is manipulated over social media. So how propaganda is distributed over social media to influence public opinion and then ultimately perhaps even influence elections.
So what are exactly your findings? What campaigns and what elections have you been researching, and what did you get to know?
The ones we have produced was one about the US election. We did 3 on the US election actually, so there's quite a lot of reading there. Then we did 2 on the French election, round 1 and round 2 of the French election. And we also did the German presidential elections. We're in the US state of Michigan, a real battleground state during the election. And what we found is that junk news and real news or legitimate news from professional news organizations were shared at a ratio of 1 to 1. So basically people were sharing just as much junk news as they were sharing news from professional news organizations.
You were also your group was also researching the French elections.
Yes.
What's interesting in there?
We found that there was a lot more traffic about Macron than there was about Le Pen, which was quite an interesting finding there. But actually the percentage of junk news shared during the French election was quite low. I believe it was at around 5 to 7%, which compares, obviously in Michigan it was almost 25% of the content shared was junk news, and in Germany it was something around 10%.
Is there a clear understanding in your group how actually do these botnets operate? What's the algorithm? Who creates? Who controls?
One of the things that our group does is they interview bot writers all over the world. It seems to be a variety of individuals that tend to write these bots, not always for financial gain. There are different motivations behind writing bots, but there's also, and this again is just something that I'm aware of, it's not something that I've done specific research on, but when it comes to large botnets, so effectively armies of bots, there are big underground marketplaces. The way we define political bots is they operate over social media platforms and they seek to really influence public opinion. So they might be interacting with people, they might be retweeting content, and yeah, they're the ones that we're most concerned with.
What is really there that can really manipulate people's opinions? So do you think it's just the mere fact that many people, users, for example, Twitter users, they don't differentiate between junk news and real news? What's the way to manipulate someone's opinion?
You know, the more something is retweeted, the more it's liked, the more legitimate it seems, the more mainstream it seems. So basically the way that this sort of computational propaganda works is it tries to make information look more grassroots. So that's how they do it. What they're actually doing is they're megaphoning this information. You know, it's artificial. It's not real people that are liking this post or sharing this post. It's fake accounts or bot accounts, or it's all automated. So they're trying to make very marginal views look more mainstream, which is problematic. I guess the real solution, I think, or one of the solutions, would be to make people more aware of this phenomenon of misinformation. The more conscious people become of these things being shared and how to verify whether something is legitimate or not, the less of a problem it will be. But like you say, you know, on the one hand, yes, you have to talk about it and you have to share it, and mainstream media has to sort of contribute to this conversation and deconstruct it. Will that mean that this news becomes more popular and people believe it? I hope not. I hope people will say, oh yes, this is ridiculous.
Social media became very toxic for the past 2, maybe 3 years. Of course, there's a certain context to what is happening in Ukrainian segment of Facebook, and in Ukraine itself we have a war, we have complicated political situation, and there is a lot of resentment. This is why people may, you know, the opinions are different and there are a lot of fights and discussions, things like that. But is there something else that makes social media so toxic, so aggressive?
Yeah, I think it's something that we have to consider. I mean, in general, the pace of technological change and how people have adapted to it is a really interesting problem that needs to be explored further. It's interesting what you say about Facebook in the Ukraine, because that to me is something quite new. It might just be because obviously every one of us has a different Facebook feed, so it really, you know, your perspectives might be completely different to someone else's. And I think the recent elections really exposed that, because you think that public opinion is perhaps behind or in favor of one thing, and then the election goes the other way, and you're thinking, why did that happen? Well, you realize that your feed was completely different, and you didn't really have much an idea what people were actually talking about.
This year, over 600 international volunteers from 140 countries will be arriving in Ukraine as part of the Go Camp project. Every volunteer will spend 3 weeks teaching socially important subjects to school children in English in various cities and towns of Ukraine. The main goal of the project is to educate a new young generation of active and conscious citizens, capable of lifelong learning and prepared for the challenges of the 21st century, fluent in foreign languages and open to other cultures and experience. 200 Go Camp participants have already arrived at their destination. Hromadske went to find out what this innovation education program involves and why the volunteers choose to come here.
I pledge to treat everyone with respect. Patience. Integrity.
I'm from the UK, but I was born in Jamaica, so I'm Jamaican. And why I'm here is because I have a passion for working with children, and I saw this opportunity on the British Council website, so I applied, and now I'm here.
My first time to be volunteering outside of my country, Egypt. I like the idea of cascading the knowledge that I know.
Last year, we had 120 volunteers from 40 countries. This year, we will have 600 volunteers from 140 countries. They learn about the program through the information we share via embassies, universities, and other diaspora communities. They come here on their own. Here in Ukraine, we will provide them assistance for traveling and living arrangements. At first, they live in the camp, and then they will live with families. We also get them to the schools. They learn about Ukraine and what the country went through. After that, they will have a 5-day workshop on how to work with children. Then, we divide all the volunteers into 4 groups and send them to different towns and villages all around the country. There, they will teach children their subjects and, of course, English. So now, English is no longer a goal, but an instrument.
What region are you going to?
It's Mariupol. We realise there's conflict in the east, and they're probably not exposed to it as much as a kid possibly in Kiev would be. So that's the motivation to go to that area.
I'm really proud. I'm going to be going to Chernihiv Oblast, where my family is from. So I couldn't be more proud of doing this.
I'm staying in Kyiv region, and I'll be teaching in 2 schools. So I have the first 2 weeks in one school, and then the last one I'll go to another school in a smaller village. So I think I'll have the opportunity to see very different universes.
Here, there was another side story. I was stopped by immigration. It was like weird for them that how can someone from Afghanistan come to volunteer in here? I was like, part of this program, or one of the main objective of this program is to cultural exchange.
There are a lot of things in Ukraine which are very similar to my own country. And I'm really awe-inspired by the beauty of the country, the geography, the history, the culture, the music, and so on.
We only saw the situation in the schools, in the system of education, and children's motivation only working with Go Global. And it scared us a bit. Everybody's talking about the future generation of Ukrainians, but if we do not work with them now, there will be no such generation. The system of education is no longer Soviet, but not yet modern. Everything depends on the personality of the teacher or headmaster. There are so many things not happening in Ukraine, but here you see the real changes, and all these people inspire and motivate you.
Тут ти одразу бачиш зміни.
At least 150 of his students have diplomas from Western universities, while he is teaching in a provincial school in Ukrainian town Vinnytsia. This is an inspiring story of a teacher of physics and computer science who tries to interest his pupils in science. 24 years ago, he and his colleagues created the Tournament of Champions, a complex scientific competition in which only the best school children can participate.
Панянки, заходьте, будь ласка.
Yuri Pasikov is a physics and computer science teacher at Specialized Gymnasium number 17 in Vinnytsia. To his students, he is Yuri Yakovich, or simply Pas.
Зараз ви отримаєте папір і завдання. Погнали наших городських. Всі мають умови.
24 years ago, he and his colleagues created the Tournament of Champions. It's a particularly complex scientific competition, which will also take place this year.
Так. Панове, підніміть ваші очки. Оці подвійні листочки, ви пишете прізвище, бажано рукою. Жертви образования, блин. Как подписать важнее, чем как решить.
Yuri says that science is not valued in Ukraine today. For this reason, his students work in corporations and make scientific discoveries, albeit overseas.
Я провінційний вчитель.
I'm a provincial teacher, but now more than 150 of my former students have greater scientific knowledge and work in economies abroad, in friendly and not so friendly states. This begs the question, where is this additional value going?
Додаткова вартість від цього де залишилась?
Considering that science in Ukraine is not well developed, I will probably have to work abroad. But if I can become very influential, then maybe I can bring some technology back to Ukraine. It would be cool to develop experimental physics and an experimental physics laboratory with all the equipment and import them into the country, so talented young people can stay here and not go somewhere else abroad.
This tournament differs from other Ukrainian competitions. It involves only the champions from the national competition. The results do not affect selection for international tournaments, and participants have to have knowledge of all three subjects, mathematics, physics, and computer science. Otherwise, they will not get a prized place.
Найкраще, що в нас є, пані, це наші діти.
The biggest thing we have is our children. That's why we have to give them a chance. If we are the country of idiots, then they will not work in this country, but in other ones.
Ну що ж робити, якщо ми страна ідіотів? Значить буде в іншій.
Thanks a lot from the entire team of Hromadske International. Stay tuned, follow our Twitter, Hromadske International, search Hromadske International on Facebook, and watch more at our webpage en.hromadske.ua. Goodbye.